about 1 minute before we open the meeting, and the way we're going to do it, we'll do just a little bit of administrative stuff, and then the master developer will have a presentation on open space. Afterwards, the board will ask questions, make comments, and certainly we'll open it up to anybody who's here. If you would like to come closer, we thought if there's not so many people, we could all sit at the same table, but it looks like if the audience exceeds the number of chairs, I can get it on this table. But please come closer. We'll be able to hear you better. And I think it's time to open. And so I will start the meeting by minutes. Minutes from the last meeting, 7:31. Any comments on the minutes before we ask for a motion? So I'll take a motion to accept the minutes. Yeah? Do we have a second? Any comments? All in favor of the minutes? That's unanimous. And the minutes also includes the map that Kathy has. To get these to the town clerk. So, next order of business, there's no administrative things other than that, so I will invite the developer's representative to give us their presentation. It's on 2 screens. Behind us is a large screen, and in front of us is a small screen. Exactly the same, except for size.
Mr. Chairman, where would you like us? You want us to sit at the table, or?
You can, but I don't know if I can get everybody
right.
at the table, so maybe a representative group can sit at the table, please, and members of the public likewise. If you were all
Easier for them to sit as well.
yeah, they may see that you could sit at the table.
Well, I was just thinking, I made, not to block anybody's view, and also this way I can also use a pointer too if I wanted to. Just so it might be easier for people to see.
Whatever is comfortable for you.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Tewitt from New England Development. There are members of our team who are here. You'll hear from probably at least 2 others. Tim Sullivan from Wilson Stores, and Bob Daler, who's our lead site civil from Tetra Tech. We know that not only have many of you been involved in this project for 20 plus years, but some of you have seen our presentation that was made in different places. We tried to make a different presentation that was a little more focused on open space and natural heritage. And also, we identified some questions that we got from you folks, from others, about a dozen questions that people have asked that are sort of open space related, or of general interest. So our thought was, we're going to talk a little bit about those questions and try to answer, not that we're going to, here's your question, here's our response, but a little bit of sort of going through, and you can, stormwater is going to be one of them. Bob's going to speak to stormwater because although it's not always directly related to open space, it is something that we know, people are interested in. I hope that when we're done, you'll see what we were trying to do, which is something very different that's been done in any of the prior developments, which is how to sort of connect the northern and the southern open space together, what to do with the runways, and how to make that work. Also, how to figure out natural heritage and the 2009 permit and how that might grow so to deal with it. Because you can't disconnect the open space, the habitat, the turtles. I mean, all of that is a function of the same thing. So hopefully you'll sort of see a piece of that as we go through how that evolved, how we envision, and we lost our signal, but so we'll try to bring that back. So was already riveting what I was saying, so just went to sleep.
Go for Kevin.
There we go. All right, we're back. So let's, if we could, we'll start, we'll run through this. We'd like to kind of go through the presentation. You know, oftentimes we begin this presentation about, well, who's doing the development, who's Brookfield, land control, what have we been doing? We're not going to do any of that tonight. Obviously, if anybody has any questions, or if any of the committee members want to talk about any of those things, we're happy to answer those things, but we're not going to kind of go through that. We're going to really focus on some of the open space issues. So tonight, a little bit about master plan vision. The redevelopment plan, which if you've seen some of these presentations, we're going to just sort of show you the plan. A little bit about rezoning. What we thought about creating an open space plan, and then putting it all together as a plan. And then, as I mentioned, frequently asked questions. That's what our sort of goal was tonight. And some of the slides and imagery you may have seen, but we think it's important so you can sort of see how we started and how these things all came together. Because I think one of the pieces of confusion, partly our fault, is people look at the zoning plan and say, oh, that's a zoning plan, so you're going to develop in this area. That's actually not the case because of all the other things that restrict the land. So we're going to try to build on the plan so people can sort of see the evolution of what we were trying to put together. So hopefully that's what we'll accomplish tonight. All right, first thing, a little bit on the vision. And I'm just going to show you 4 slides. And the reason why I'm going to show you them is it really did inform, long before we did anything else, about the base. What was it before? What did it become? What is it today? And then what do we envision? We're going to show you some graphics a little bit different than some of the things that we've done. All of this is the idea of how to create connectivity, how to bring the north and south open space together, and how to do something with the runways different than what other people have thought about doing. So when you think about pre-1940, pre-World War II, Huckleberry Hill down at the bottom, farmland, this is really the 1,400 acres plus or minus of the base. Obviously very different than what it is today. Military base, about 880 acres gets disturbed. You know, some of the imagery that's there. Eventually runways, storage areas, the areas to hold the blimps. Huckleberry Hill comes down, things get moved, big 48-inch pipes get put in the ground, just a whole evolution of everything that was associated with moving and getting ready for and participating in World War II. What exists there today? What exists there today is about 1,274 residences, what you see up in the top left. Much of the base and the runways and the disturbed areas are as they were when we saw in the military times. And what we thought about, and this became an idea that should have been very obvious, but really necessarily wasn't. You have a lot of open space up in the north, you have open space down in the south, you have habitat in the area down in the south, you have these long runways. Is there a way to connect that which is in the north and to the south and create a place where actually the open space and the green areas could become amenities, not just in trails, but in places where people would live, including also having where you have commercial development. So our big idea was really this idea of runways to greenways. And what's so hard on a plan this size, when you're showing 1,400 acres in a little plan like this, is to get a sense of the thousands of feet of these runways, the width of the green areas, all in the concept of bringing that open space in the north and the south together and connecting it all. And that was sort of our idea. Our other idea, which I'm going to show you in a minute, was have perimeter open space all around the base. Again, to try to come up with opportunities for connection. If you think about, and I'll show it to you in a minute, Commonwealth Avenue, when you think about the width of Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, where you have townhomes and multifamily dwellings on both sides, these areas would be wider than those areas. bigger than those areas, longer than those areas, to really create place in the north and south connection. So that was sort of that's where we started. That was sort of the first thing we thought about is, what does this place become? Should it become as you move forward? So that's a little bit about the vision. I'd ask you to think of that as we sort of go through. Okay. Then we had to go through a series of things. One of the things is the redevelopment plan. There have been multiple redevelopment plans, and I'm sure many of you know them well that have been on this base. The last redevelopment plan was a plan that was destined to fail. It was a plan that had very specific areas, very specific, you'll build this kind of unit in this location. Anyone who can try to predict that kind of an outcome really can't. So we looked at the redevelopment plan and said, okay, well, there are completed areas, which you see up there in orange. There's open space. Let's create an open space that sort of rims all around it. And then the land that's left over that hasn't been developed. And we'll call that, just for these purposes, developable area. So identify potential developable area, identify the open space, identify that which has been completed. Now that doesn't mean developable area is truly developable, because in that, for example, especially as we sit in Rockland, you have turtle habitat, you have other habitats. But that was just sort of, okay, you start with the land use plan. You start with rezoning too, okay, because you have a plan, but you have to implement that plan to think about rezoning. And the zoning has a couple of different parts to it. It has the text of the rezoning. I mean, one of the biggest knocks on the project, and again, we think one of the reasons it's failed, and it's failed multiple times, is the zoning was so difficult to follow. It was 32 different overlay districts. I think Bob Luongo said it best there was a planner over in Weymouth, said, I have a whole box on the zoning here, I just don't understand what it is. So it's been a planner for 35 years. Very difficult to understand. But then you think about a rezoning plan and trying to build it, you see the yellows and the orange and the pinks. That's where the purple, and well, the pink is really purple, that's where the recreational fields are. The yellow and the orange are where the areas have been developed. We couldn't change those. You can't change the zone. If someone built homes, you gotta leave that alone. So again, you sort of had that. You had the idea of creating the open space all around. And saying, okay, how do we build a zoning bylaw by creating a district that would allow us to develop in the areas that haven't been developed, knowing there are going to be other constraints on that. Now, we did go through a zoning process with the SRA, and they approved it in March. We did go through with the Weymouth Town Council. We got the planning board unanimously approved it, and then the ordinance committee did, and then the town council approved it not very long ago, over a month ago, June 26th. And now we have town meetings coming up in both Abington and Rockland. So that was sort of the zoning process. So you think about it. We had a vision, create a redevelopment plan. All right, how do you create a zoning that sort of makes that work? Okay. Creating an open space plan. A couple of things. Where do you start? Well, this is the base. 884 acres were disturbed as part of the base development. That sort of shows the areas that were there, whether they be runways, areas for pavement, give you a sense. Okay, so that's sort of what's here. Yes, there are areas that are developed, but that's sort of our starting point with the base. Okay. 131 acres have been developed. Those are the areas in orange. And they match up with the zoning map, for example. They are where people have built things, where the various multifamily, the townhomes, Faring Way, recreational facilities, they're all sort of shown in the orange. But you're still the remainder of the base. Okay. So as you move forward, you bring back in the land use plan. You want to have the open space to bring in everything in orange has been developed, developable areas, that which is left over. Okay, bring in the land use plan. Bring in the zoning plan and say, okay, I've got to overlay the zoning plan, acknowledge that development where it's happened, build on the areas that have been disturbed by the Navy, create some kind of a framework where you can start to think about how am I going to develop on this site. Then you start thinking about the greenways, which so the runways to greenways. Add these 100, 200-foot wide linear corridors that link the north and the south, and you sort of see it in the dotted areas that are there. So you got the Parkway in the middle, obviously Route 18 to the left, 228. You got Rockland in the sort of right corner, Abington to the left, Weymouth at the top of the plan. So you start thinking about how you make those connections. You have the open space buffer, you have developed areas, you have the connections that we want to put in as part of the base. But you also got to recognize there's a 2009 Natural Heritage Conservation Management Permit. Okay. That's what's still the governing document. Most of that would tell you, and I'm going to stop and spend a minute on this because I think it's important because it relates to what we're going to do. I'm not sure where I'm going to put my screen. I guess I'll put it over here. Again, you've got the Rockland piece here, you've got Abington, you've got Weymouth up top. Okay. That area right in there is really, they call it the G-Crab. That's where the golf course was going to go. About 204 acres of sort of golf course area sitting there. So you ended up with 434 restricted acres, including the golf course. One of the problems with it was not particularly contiguous because you also had habitat, eastern box turtle, other areas here. Habitat was not all protected. And in 2017, L-Star had filed a MEPA filing and a Natural Heritage Permit filing that was going to impact an area here in Abington and also in Rockland and move the line and get rid of the golf course. Now, in typical L-Star fashion, none of that was ever finished, and none of it was really completed. But you got to, when we're looking at it, we're saying, okay, and that's what I hope I'm conveying to you, redevelopment plan, zoning, those are constraints. Why create open space, buffer zone? Okay. You got natural heritage and its permit. How does that all work? Again, trying to build a series of understandings about the constraints and what can you really do with this land. Okay, so we recognize that. So as we move forward, knowing that, we have to think about how do you put that all together? How do you take those desperate pieces and say, what could this be? What are the ultimate constraints going to be? How does it relate to the open space? Okay. We have met with and have proposed to Natural Heritage a different CMP, different conservation management. The golf course is gone. The golf course was proposed to be gone in 2017, but again, L-Star never finished that work. So, golf course, I'll put it myself, I'll bring this up. The golf course area all being in through here. It wasn't contiguous space, and that's why I stopped for a minute and spent the time on the 2009 management plan, because there were areas over here, and there were areas up here in Rockland that weren't restricted, and some of it that weren't buffered area either. So we had the contiguous, we wanted and proposed a contiguous open space. More habitat being protected, because the eastern box turtle, and if you've gone and seen some of our presentations, I think we have the second largest monitored population of eastern box turtle in Massachusetts, I think, at the base. But they're up in this area here. They all go through down here. They kind of move around, as you might imagine. And we want to also consider the 2017, which changed the 2009 line, but again, was never completed. So what we're going to propose is, and have proposed Natural Heritage, actually to create more restricted areas through Natural Heritage than are restricted today. I'm going to show you a chart that compares those two things in a second. Then you think about the open space plan as it relates also to the conservation management plan. So that area down there that we showed in the earlier plan, expand the conservation management plan area, make it all contiguous. You sort of see all through Rockland, down into Abington, all through here, so that all of the habitat is there. Acknowledge there was a 2017 change in the line, which is in this area here. Eliminate the golf course. Now the golf course, which is 2009, still part of it. You know, people, some would consider that as open space. And it is, partly. But it also had clubhouse, pathways, parking lots. It wasn't all open space. That's been eliminated, and what we're going to obviously file with Natural Heritage, that the golf course will go away. And the land that we're showing as contiguous open space doesn't have a golf course, isn't intended to be disturbed by those things. The idea is to make the open space, whatever conservation restriction area we have, available for true open space, recreation trails, habitat. The other thing is to address the debris piles. I think everybody who sort of knows and wants this area knows the debris piles, where they've been sort of dumped, and they all have to be dumped. No great surprise, part of the 2009 permit, those debris piles are supposed to be addressed. There's supposed to be an escrow account, there's supposed to be funding, there's supposed to be ongoing monitoring money. It's all in default. It all has to be done, because the monies weren't fully paid, debris piles weren't addressed. So what we're proposing, and again, we'll talk about it in a minute, is to create The area that you see there, all in green, is a combination of open space and restricted area with some level of overlap of the two, all contiguous. A little bit of comparison, 2009 open space, on-site open space, including the CMP, was about 848 acres. 2023, what we're going to propose and are proposing natural heritage is about 885 acres. The restricted area that was part of 2009's 434 acres, we're proposing 519 acres. Some of the things to note under 2009, that restricted area allowed for golf course, clubhouse, meeting facilities, access drive, parking lots, maintenance, buildings, all. As I mentioned, all the escrows were in default. They all have to be reinstituted. And then the restoration areas, including the debris pile, selective mowing, all that, most of that is in default, although the SRA is trying to keep up with some. What we're proposing in 2023 is to increase the restricted area, make it contiguous, have an opportunity for a network, and protect more of the habitat. We'll actually protect virtually 100% of these external habitat by taking the debris piles down and creating the areas down there as open areas. It's a lot for the various bird habitat that they've identified on the site. So that, in a big picture way, is what we're trying to do, and what we're proposing to do through natural heritage. To get back to, and I'm just going to go back for a second, this idea of a restricted area, about 500 acres, the open space ring around here, the runways to greenways connection to that space, and then a combination of escrow monies with the state that we'll talk about. It's the same picture. So it's trying to put together all of those things coming together, whether it be the runways to greenways, the open space, all as one master plan picture. That's the comparison that we've just done. Now, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes, because I think it's helpful and may answer some of the questions that people have. And again, these are questions that we picked that were on lists and memos, people that, and we'd like to, not that we're going to read the question and read the response. I'd like to just touch on a few of them. Tim's going to speak to a few of them, and I think Bob Daler is going to speak to the stormwater one, because I think it will help answer some of the questions that people have. I apologize for some of the size of the font here, but one of the questions came, is are there new access roads for general use? We are not proposing any new access roads. I think the access roads that we have are there. If there's an emergency access that's requested, obviously you'll have to deal with probably the fire department. The Union Street Gate, which although technically may not be a pure open space issue, but has been asked a lot. As far as we know, the gate is closed and intended to remain closed. We have no proposal to be able to open it. Town decides to do something in the future different than that. That's up to them. That's not our proposal. So those were a couple of the first questions. I'm going to turn it over to Tim. He's going to sort of run through the next sort of half a dozen or so questions before we get to stormwater. That's okay. Good job.
So Tim Sullivan, Coastal Wind Storage. So the first couple questions are about the conservation restrictions. So one of them is there a conservation restriction now? And if so, who holds it? The answer to that is yes. Multiple parcels are subject to a conservation restriction now. Excuse me, multiple parcels are subject to a restriction now. It's about 434 acres. And about half of that can be developed as a golf course, clubhouse, parking lots, that sort of thing. The SRA is the holder of that restriction. Separate question, will there be a conservation restriction going forward? And John had just mentioned that as well. Yes, is the answer. And that's a process with natural heritage to identify that, but John outlined that the acreage of that, and that we expect it would also be held by the SRA, Southfield Redevelopment Authority. That hasn't been finalized yet because the restriction hasn't been finalized, but that's what we expect. The next question is a question about the National Park Service, and a question that comes up from time to time is, are you aware of restrictions that they impose? And yes, we are. There's land conveyed from the National Park Service, which is subject to certain restrictions in the deed, consistent with open space use. Those will be complied with. We'll have to work with the SRA, depending on who owns the land, but yes, we're aware of them and they'll be complied with. What uses are allowed in open space is another question that's come up. So John had mentioned the idea is to have a perimeter open space district around the edge of the site. To do that, there are certain uses that have to be allowed. Recreational type uses, active recreational uses, utilities, stormwater, life safety type uses. If emergency access has to come through, utilities have to come through, so those uses are allowed in the open space district. Another question that has come up from time to time is, can the SRA unilaterally change the redevelopment plan? And can it unilaterally change zoning? Two different answers. Can it change the redevelopment plan? It can. It has always been able to. The current, the one immediately prior, with input from the state, and that's the same way it is going forward. Can it unilaterally change zoning? No, it can't. Material changes have to go through the towns, and again, that's the way it's been. Thompson Pond and Rockwood Meadows, two areas of open space outside of the base. The question is, will they be included in open space? Those parcels are not owned by us, they're owned by third parties unrelated to us. If and to the extent, it was a commitment of the prior master developer that wasn't followed through on. So if the towns or the SRA were to require them, we'd incorporate them, but we have no control over those parcels. Have there been ongoing conversations with Natural Heritage, and what is the status? There have. John has mentioned a number of times in a number of presentations, the area subject to the Natural Heritage restriction, the CMP, the Conservation Management Permit, wasn't owned by us, wasn't owned by the SRA. L-Star still owned it. Until there was a taking by the SRA to reacquire the land, we couldn't have those conversations with the state. That was the end of last year. So yes, those conversations are ongoing. The things that John talked about is contiguous areas with turtles and all those things have been part of the conversations. And that will be finalized, but can't be finalized until we get through the NEPA process. What are the roles of the building departments in Rockland and Abington? This is another one that comes up. So the building departments of each of the towns, Weymouth, Rockland, and Abington, issue the building permits, collect the building permit fees, issue the certificates of occupancy, they review applications. That all stays with the town. It's with the town now. It's going to be with the town going forward. That's not changing. So someone asked a question about who's reviewing the building permits. The town. The town where the property is being constructed is the town that's reviewing it. Who has approval authority? Also not changing. With respect to the Southfield Redevelopment Authority for zoning permits, they issue the zoning permits in the developable area now. They will going forward. Just a little bit, because this is my area, the way this will work is that permit would be issued by the SRA. They'd issue a zoning certificate. That would go to the town, so the building inspector would have it. They know they're in compliance, and then the building department will review structural issues, review building code issues and all that sort of thing. They'll collect the fees, they'll be in charge of the building permit and the certificate of occupancy. Next one's stormwater, and you don't want me talking about that, so I'm going to give that to Bob Taylor.
It's nice to be back in Rockland High School. I don't remember the classes looking like this, but I graduated from the high school in '56. I grew up in this town, which is my hometown.
You need to speak up, please.
I will speak up. So I've been doing the planning of all the stormwater management and working on the land development here in town. And this is one of the questions that we've heard is, does all the stormwater flow into Rockland or Abington? And no, the watershed, and I'll show that in a moment, is really divided into three basins. Three of those basins flow into French's Stream, and the other two, the eastern portions of the site, flow into the Old Swamp River. But the majority of the site, roughly 83% of it, flows down in this area. We've taken a substantially different plan, approach to the drainage. And I'll go through that in a minute. And we've tried to develop a plan that works integrating the open space, integrating the natural resources, and to create redundancy, which increases the protection for the folks who live downstream along French's Stream. So this is at the very top of the picture here is the base. And this is French's Stream and floodplain. This purple block that you see here is Reed's Pond. So this is the flood risk that the town now faces. Obviously, being part of the headwaters of French's Stream, it's important for us to integrate protective measures. And this is a picture of some of the protective measures that we're integrating into the plan. Now, as I said before, there are 5 watersheds, sub-watersheds, each shown by a different color. So the ones that are on the east, the yellow and this ochre color, are flowing into the Old Swamp River, which flows to the north. And you recall from before the pictures that we had of the illustrations before the base was developed, it showed 2 watersheds, one flowing to the south and one flowing to the north. That still exists, and we're working within that context. So the purple basin flows into the west branch of French's Stream, which is this blue thread here. The central portion of the site now drains down in various airport drainage and piping that they put in with the base and flows. Some of it flows directly into the stream, some of it flows into this Tacken basin that the Navy built to put some of its runoff from the runways into that basin. And then some of it flows in this largely undeveloped area along the diagonal taxiway. And these 2 streams, the east branch and the west branch of French's Stream, pass under Spruce Street in 2 separate culverts, and then join on the other side and become a single stream flowing through a natural watercourse in a large wetland below the site. Now, the existing development has integrated drainage solutions similar to the ones that you're probably all familiar with. Someone builds a phase of the units, and they built okay. Well, let me just, if I can drive without my finger pencil here. So that if you look at the existing development, the light blue colors are the drainage basins that serve the existing area. So what the prior developers did is that they built a section, collected it with the storm drainage, and put it in a basin, and had that basin discharged directly in the stream. So they built something, they did a mitigation of a stormwater basin, and then discharged that into French's Brook. We're doing something different. So we're taking the existing runoff and we're capturing it in these long, linear blue stripes that you see. Those are the greenways. And what are those greenways now? I know a lot of you have walked on the site, you know what the site looks like. It's an abandoned runway 200 feet wide. And I want to have you picture what we intend to do in those basins. That's a long linear park. And it's these greenways that we're talking about. So it contains trails, it contains open space, it has roads, it has a trail system which will eventually connect into the larger trail system. But where the greenways turn to blueways, the long blue stripes that you see, that's it. That's excavating the runway, now 200 feet wide, creating a shallow valley with a stream flowing through the bottom. So now we take the runoff from the existing development and create this long meandering stream, each of which will be crossed by roads, and each of those sections creates a stormwater basin. So this is now a stormwater basin that's 3,000 feet long, 200 feet across, and it has control points all the way along, all of which create renovation of the stormwater, control of volumes, and we get to the end. But unlike what the prior developers have done, we don't dump that immediately into the French's Stream. We take that, even though we've already mitigated in these long linear basins, we're taking that and putting that into the Tacken Basin. And we do that in the central greenway, that middle blue stripe, and we also do it just at the very western edge of that central light green area that you see. So that whole central green area we collect, we do this in each of the phases. We build stormwater management, we put all of that treated discharge into the Tacken Basin, and we store it there again. Now, we have modified the outlet of that Tacken Basin, and we've redirected a portion of the watershed to make all of this work. And our goal was that by using the basin, could we use the basin and never increase the flood level and inside the Tacken Basin? That is, could we modify how we direct the water and how we change? Right now, the only controls in the Tacken are the capacity of the twin 60-inch pipes that are beneath the runway. So whatever they pass, they pass. We're building an outlet control structure that holds that water, keeps it in there, but we've designed it so that from the 2 to the 100-year storm, the resulting flood level in the upland and wetland portions of the Tacken are 6 to 7 inches lower than they are now. We did that because we're thinking wholly about all of this, working with fish and wildlife, working with natural heritage, working around the turtle habitat, and we can't alter the turtle habitat because they've adapted to the inundation in there. So now we can't increase that flooding. So and this is not magic, we've designed a new outlet, we've diverted the upper basins, and we've built in redundancy. So our stormwater basins discharge into other downstream stormwater basins where we can hold it further. If you look at the central green area where most of the development area is, we've reduced the peak discharges out of that by 35%, what exists there now. So that's a significant benefit. We do that without any increase in the flooding in the wetlands. There's no untreated stormwater discharge into any wetlands anywhere in the site. As a matter of fact, there's very little wetland alteration at all, except where we actually need to make connections and structures that we need to build in the Old Navy ditches. So all of this meets the stormwater standards. It's a significant improvement over the past approaches, and it works in natural systems instead of having, as the Navy did. The Navy's goal was to get the water out of the runways and keep the runways operational in all kinds of weather. Our goal is much different. Our goal is to integrate the development of this site into open space and natural resources protection, and also to look at that, how this development can play a significant role in reducing flooding downstream in French's Stream. All of this is supported by a 425-page hydraulic analysis with all the mathematics, and all of that is on record and on file. John, I think we can wrap up.
I will wrap up. Thank you, Bob. Sharon, I hope that wasn't too much, but we got an awful lot of questions about stormwater impacts existing and proposed, so we thought we'd try to give you a little bit more fulsome story on that. Last kind of question, will you enter into a written agreement, work with the town on the open space plan and recreational amenities? We absolutely will commit in writing to, as you might imagine, we're not at the design phase yet. We don't want to design a trail plan that doesn't have everybody's input on it, and also doesn't reflect, as we start to think about what the base and actual buildings would be on it. But as far as working with the committee to develop that plan and recreational activities and trail plans, there were prior agreements. I think, as you all know, this site was a subject of foreclosure and a lot of those things. It also was a very, very different plan that we eventually called the old Elstar plan, kind of a Dubai plan. 20-story buildings, man-made lakes and things. I mean, that's certainly not what we're doing. Ours is a more standard sort of residential commercial development that is reflective of what we think the market is and what people are interested in, how they're interested in. So we'll stop with that, and certainly available to answer any questions. We brought a lot of our team here, so we'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'll have the board ask questions and comments. I just want to ask a couple of things. On the zoning, you said that the zone open space is 884 acres, is that correct?
No. So the 884 acres is the total open space. So
Total
it's
open.
not just that green district, it's everything. It's the restricted area, which includes areas within those
So it
restricted districts.
includes the 434 restricted areas, so
Yeah,
I
so
know
it's everything.
I'm not going to
Yeah.
add both of those together
Right.
because it's
Yeah.
the first number includes.
Yes.
And engineering, I look at them as detention basins. Will they ever be dry? Are they designed so there'll be some water in them at all times, or will there be a dry period where some of them are very large, will it be actually dry?
Some of them will be dry, but some of them are designed to be as wet basins for their habitat. So some of them will be designed to be wet, but most of the smaller ones will be normally dry.
And with those, if the Conservation Commission looks at them in the future, would they consider them wetlands therefore?
Not when they're created for stormwater purposes. When they're created for stormwater purposes, even though they grow a wetland, we could design a creative wetland, but when they were created for stormwater purposes, they don't become regulated natural wetlands.
All right, why don't I open it up at this end, Michael?
I have a few questions. I'm just curious, it seems almost like we've got the cart before the horse here. By proposing something to natural heritage just this time, you haven't really, nothing's negotiated with your proposal at this point. You haven't have you given National Heritage a proposal yet?
Yes, we have.
And have they agreed to it?
Well, they've been out, they've done site walks, they've looked at the existing permits and approvals. We've proposed with them that we would create this contiguous area, more restricted space than they have now. They like that idea because they don't like the fact that it isn't contiguous. One thing of having all this knowledge about where the eastern box turtles are, we know, so where they've traveled, it's not all in a restricted area. So they have seen that. They're very interested in what, so we've sort of said this is the area that we'd like to focus on. They want more information from us, which we actually just submitted to them regarding the habitat and the grassland habitat and what to do with the debris piles. Because having the debris piles really impacts in a negative way grassland habitat and cuts it down because bird habitat likes open areas. They're concerned when something rises vertically, predators are in that area. So they want us to have a plan on how to deal with that. So that's part of what we're doing with them and what we're going to propose on the debris piles. We've proposed to them generally where we would create the areas. We have to work with them on escrow accounts and monies they very much want to have, and we've offered that unlike what the situation is now, there's no money set aside for monitoring, for mowing, all the way, to keep up the restricted area. We're proposed to create those funds. So that's all part of the process that we're working through them. Two things you have to remember. We didn't own or control or have an opportunity to control this land until the end of last year because that was primarily all owned by Elstar. So it wasn't until the SRA actually took that land by eminent domain, and we have an arrangement with the SRA, that we could actually start to have that dialogue and try to move that forward. So that was sort of one big piece. And the final natural heritage permit, as revised, can't be issued until MEPA is issued, because MEPA, the next certificate on there, a state agency can't act without the updated MEPA certificate. So those are two things. One, we had to wait until we had an opportunity to control the land. Two, we have to go through the MEPA process. As part of our MEPA filing, all of what I just said is set out in that filing.
So part of that would be the grassland plan that Heritage has accepted already, which is to remove the.
We have submitted it. I'm not going to say they have accepted it.
Well, the previous grassland plan by VHB was, I think, approved by Natural Heritage, right?
There was a filing of the natural heritage, well, there is an existing and governing 2009 conservation management permit. That's the one that governs. People talk about, oh, well, there was subsequent files and things, but none of that governs. So what governs is the 2009 CMP permit. And if Natural Heritage was sitting here, that's what they would say. That's what governs.
So how many acres of grasslands are you proposing to Natural Heritage?
I think we're over 100 contiguous open grassland acres that we're proposing to create as all in the southern, most of them, a lot of it in Rockland, a lot of it and a lot of it in Abington, all of them.
Are you planning to mitigate any of the off base for this grassland bird habitat?
No. Now, I say that, we're going to offer escrow monies to deal with the overall base as the prior developer did. Now again, that escrow is in default. We are going to offer so that the state can go and also acquire additional grassland areas. We are going to offer that as part of our package for natural heritage.
So the state can acquire one?
Well, the state can work to create additional grassland because the state has a program. They've identified 50 of the top grassland areas where they want to acquire, get restrictions or otherwise. This is by far very low on the list. There are much better areas for grassland habitat than a place like this. And they've identified. So and this exists in the CMP permit today, that monies will be utilized for opportunities to buy, for the state to acquire, or otherwise restrict grassland habitat.
Is it 3-to-1 ratio if you give that money to buy land off site to mitigate the current 2009 plan, or you have to kind of purchase land somewhere else and, to give to the state, so Like
And some of it's 2 to 1 and some of it's 3 to
3 to 1,
It all depends on the habitat that you have. And some was already, yeah, because there was some money's paid in the escrow account and spent by the city. But then it went into default.
so again, you're not planning on mitigating any of this land, giving money to the state so they can buy property off-site?
We are, we're gonna create an escrow for
You
the
are.
state, and we're gonna give them that money.
So how many acres of grassland open space exist in the 2009 CNM property?
I don't know if I know that answer. I can get it.
So it'll be whatever, there'll only be 100 left, so whatever it is, there'll be 100 left.
It's more than 100. I can get you that figure. I was looking over at Katie Barnack, who was our wetland scientist, who was working that out.
I'll get you that in a few minutes, okay?
Sure thing. As I kind of figured that, if you're coming down south of the Abington area there, that far south, you know, you're not even wide enough open for, grassland birds,
That's not true. That whole southern region there, again, it's very deceptive on this plan because it's 1,400 acre site. It's a very significant grassland area that's in the southern region.
So, on this asset development plan that was provided by you folks, this is labeled MUDD, Mixed Use Development District. So, how can this be labeled that when that one says it's all open space?
Just remember, and this is something Michael, you raised before.
Yeah.
That's why, and maybe I didn't do a good job explaining. There are the area, there's the reuse plan, which has got the total area. Then there's the zoning. You can't look at it other than with the constraints that the different agencies and regulations bring to it. Right now, what is restricted is virtually everything south of Abington and Rock. If you look at that plan today, and I don't know if you've got the, got some juice back. Oh, we got some juice back there. Virtually everything south of this line is the G crab and is restricted. That's what exists today. So when you say that that area is developable, right now it's not developable at all because it's all subject to the 2009 conservation management. That's what's in that area. Almost right at the property.
But you're not proposing the 2009 management plan, you're proposing this, and this has mixed-use development plan, you know, in those areas. So it is very confusing.
It is, and that's why we're
I don't know why it couldn't have been simplified. I mean, I have maps from,
Because the
No,
natural
stop.
heritage permit is not finalized in what we're proposing.
right,
Until that's finalized, then this is just for because our sort of risk and our issue is, if natural heritage shouldn't agree, there's very little land in Abington or Rockland Village.
so it's just hard for the open space committee to make, you know, to go along with the plan, when we don't know in detail in writing what acres, where exactly the acres will be, how it's protected, who's gonna protect it in perpetuity under the CR. We don't have any of that. So I don't,
I would suggest you do, because
Okay.
that is the 2009 structure that you have.
which you propose to change.
Right. But none of that can be completed, and you have to think about the process that you go through. You create the zoning, you work through the communities, you get community support, you file the MEPA. MEPA includes the whole natural heritage, which you folks will be involved in and commenting on, I'm quite sure. You kind of do that, you end up with, because until that whole process is over, natural heritage can't issue a permit. So right now, what you have is the line that's along the property line of other towns. That's the line. Yes, we'll propose something else. And we're gonna propose that we can do some additional development here, like in 2017, they proposed that you could develop down into this area. But again, that never
I don't think
got
so.
finalized. Sure it did.
2017, it comes straight across almost. Just a little bit in Abington you can build, but it comes straight across. In fact, if you provided a map like this to us, that would be excellent, you know.
I don't know that map, but we can certainly, Joe does will give you that, but there's a series of acreage in through here that's developed now in 2017. But quite honestly, that doesn't matter, because they never then continued to go forward to amend the 2009 conservation measure.
I think in a sense, it's more confusing for everybody if we keep talking about the 2009, because it's going to be changed one way or the other. So it's like talking about the zoning and the master plan, or the reuse plan even before that. It's gone. The 2009 is there right now, but you're proposing to change it, so we should focus on that as opposed to going to the 2009, C&M permit, going back to that all the time.
Which is what that is. That's the big change. And to create this whole area as contiguous and restricted. That
I
is,
think I have a map here that says different SCRs across, it might take me a few minutes to find it, but anyway, so can I ask you, there was some of the questions or comments while I'm looking for this was, are you going to be talking to the National Park Service to swap out any lands anywhere? Which a past developer has done. We had an area secured all around the perimeter. I think you mentioned was created, the walkway
white
around.
area, I think, or one of
The
the
perimeter area was already there from the Park Service in 2003, so it wasn't like newly created,
We're
like,
not proposing anything.
you're not proposing anything with the Park Service. We have that in writing as well? Because your proposals are good, but unless it's in writing, it doesn't mean a whole lot, only because past history with past developers, including the last one, it didn't do us a whole lot of good, so. Yeah, if we could have something like that in writing, that would be excellent too. I mean, I don't know if I have the authority to ask you, but I mean,
You don't,
Yeah.
but the town does.
yeah,
And I think what we offered is that we would do a writing.
yeah.
And I want to take the issues that you're concerned about. That we'll work with you on developing a trail plan, that we won't have accesses that you don't approve, things like that. I want to take those points together, and I'm happy to propose it as something that we could have. And it can't be, the Open Space Committee doesn't have the ability to be able to be a signatory to that, but I think we could do that, and we want to do that because I honestly believe this plan, if people will look at it and think about it, and yes, you have to recognize that it won't be done until we're done with natural heritage, is a better plan than has been out there before.
So, as you know, I sent you an email in February of this year, so we could, Donald and I can go and visit you and start talking with you to work together, because when you folks were originally taken on by, the SRA a couple of years ago, it was all we're gonna work with the towns, we're gonna do this and that, and I didn't see any of that at all with at least our town, with me anyways, with this committee. I just saw, we didn't have the first chance to talk to you from February all the way into last week, so 2 weeks ago. So
A couple of things.
so I'm just saying, if I could finish it, so it makes it really difficult to cram us all in before your deadline, September 5th with the selectmen and then the planning board, and then for us to be voting on, November 7th. We want to bring to the townspeople, a good plan that we have too, but it's hard to cram all this in.
I think of a couple of different ways. One, the town wanted us to go through a certain process with it. Two, up until the end of last year, we didn't have anything to talk about. Because most of the open space, habitat, roadways, water and sewer infrastructure are owned by Hillstone. And until that happened, until that changed at the end of last year, there was nothing, we couldn't do anything in natural heritage. We actually met with the state and talked to them, and they said, well, when you somehow get that land under control, we'll talk to you. But until that time, it's owned by a group out of North Carolina, and there's nothing really to talk to you about. Because we couldn't deliver on it, we couldn't plan on it, we had no right to get it. That all happened, changed at the end of last year.
Do you have an amenities plan at all?
Not yet. I would assume it is one that we would work, together a little bit with folks on what they want, but we're not at that stage.
I think the legislation says 6 months after you come on board, and 7 months should be an open space preservation plan and an amenities plan. And I understand the situation, you just got the land last year. But that would make it easier for us as well. Like I said, we want to endorse whatever plan you're coming up with. You know how many acres in total there'll be of open space on the base?
open
All three
space
towns?
and restricted land in all the towns, about 885 plus or minus.
So you know it was 1,007, you know, for many years.
Yeah, the 1,007 wasn't real. And I know that's got, what I just said, people get very upset about, but realize 80 acres of it was off-site. So that's, of that 1,007, 80 acres
Where
was
was that?
Meadows and Thompson Farm.
And it interrupt, that was not so. That didn't come until later because the developer changed the zoning and decreased the amount of acreage within the perimeter of the base. And he compensated by having the Meadows and Thompson Pond, which equaled about the same. So we supported that at town meeting. He got that passed, and then it just wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Because he, in fact, the developer of the Meadows, he gave them, made a deal with him to give land within the base, and he built it within the base. So he did okay. The only people that didn't do okay were the people of the town of Rockland.
Yeah, it was mortgaged to somebody else who foreclosed it.
That's correct.
So, but it's,
So, but the 1,007 was preserved.
It was inside the borders, 2007.
I think we ought to have a working session to talk about that, because the chart that we have has 80 acres is a part of the 1,007. So if that's not right, we should go through that, because that's what we have. And then when you do the math and you add it all up, the other thing on the 1,007 acres, and I think, we've not talked about this a lot, but did you know there was no survey, no full instrument survey done at the base, in the base area? When we originally, we've just spent just shy of $500,000 to survey the entire base and understand where everything is. When some of those acres and materials that were put together and some of the VHB plans, they weren't based on instrument surveys. And some of the numbers were not right. So, and I'm happy to, I think it might be helpful, sit down and have a little session where we go through that.
The other point I make is that and some of the national park land was taken off, full houses are built on what was originally national park, and it's not buildable land. So we've seen a shrinkage of the promise.
I can't, and I can't solve that for you. There's a lot of promises, commitments, and other things that were made that weren't real and never happened. That's true. What I can tell you is what I know we can do, based on real acreage, real surveyed land, understanding where everything is. I can tell you what we can do. I can't solve for you or go back and say, this is what was committed to, and this is what should be committed to again, because some of it wasn't happening.
Were they several acres off or something?
Sure, all kinds of places. Even the acreage that they used for, and it sounds like a small thing, but Thompson Pond was off by 4 acres. So when they say 80 really isn't that, it's 75 and change. There's all kinds of areas that had been rezoned that were included and then included as open space. There were all kinds of things that just weren't. We base our numbers on instrument surveys, real acreage of what's actually there, not what perception or what gross plans would show or areas would show.
So I think like the top comment up here, you're going to be adhering to smart growth principles, which all along, since the base closed, is basically build in the existing areas that's already been built on by the Navy, and not into the woods and clear cutting. Because I saw your stormwater plan, it was like a big patch of forest was missing all the way to the west branch of Francis Stream. So are you going to be clear cutting out there, or are you going to stay within smart growth principles that meet the process you wanted us to go by all these years?
A couple things I'll tell you about smart growth. The smart growth principles that exist today are very different than the ones, they're far more stringent today than they were when this base was originally permitted and run through. I don't want to stand here and say to you, yeah, we're not going to touch a piece of tree or wood or, because I don't know that. I mean, Bob, you'd have to, I'm happy to go through with a larger scale plan that's on the stormwater plan. that we have for master development to see if there are anything. There will be, for example, shrub clearing and some clearing that will be associated with the grassland. I mean, that's absolutely going to be part of the process, and to protect the habitat, I can tell you that, as well as the pieces of the southern region. Same way that the debris piles have to be dealt with. We can't leave the debris piles as everything's in that debris pile. Some of it's reusable material, some of it's just trash. So that's all we do.
Well, I'm sure myself, I'm sure the rest of the committee would think that if you didn't do any clear cutting anyway, you know. I mean, this was the 3 towns voted on this to have so many acres of open space, so many acres of parks and fields. And I think Mr. Dale was here. I think he might have done the study years ago, 20 years ago. Did you go to the 3 towns and ask what kind of fields and stuff they wanted? No, it's a Dale Consulting plan that I have. Actually, I have that right here. How many, you know, soccer fields and how many, you know, recreation, how much open space and stuff like that. So I think somebody went to the 3 towns and asked what they needed, and that's what they came up with. I know the towns need revenue, but I think these things are going to be more important, especially if you're going to put a boatload of housing up there.
If we've got housing and commercial, obviously a piece of that is also recreation, but I don't want to say to you, oh yeah, we've designed and we've figured out what that's going to be, because we haven't. And part of it will be driven by, you know, how we phase in development. There's a great desire to have those kind of recreational amenities. We've already been contacted by a bunch of folks who would like to do those. Fully expect what they, you know, that would be part of the development. Exactly where that is right now, we haven't.
Would they be open to the kids gathering up to have a baseball game or something like that? Are they all private paid entities?
There are different types of amenities. Some of them that have contacted us on things like what are there now, that those would be more contributory. We do imagine that we're going to do, you know, playgrounds and other recreational facilities that will be available to people who live there. It'll be both kinds.
I'm just going through the list.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
So other than the land that Natural Heritage is going to have to put in CR, and other than the land that the National Park Service already has protected, are you going to put any other of the open space land in conservation restriction? Because in some of your literature you said it could be owned by the town or
Yeah,
something else
we think a lot of them are held by the SRA now.
through the Park Service.
Some of it, yeah. So we imagine it'll probably be the SRA again, unless they change.
They would be the holder of CR? They, you know, they might dissolve at some point.
It's a long life to them.
It is, but at some point they'll dissolve. You don't get the protection from a town or a, you know, authority like the SRA as you would with a permanent conservation restriction, which is ultimately what was going to happen for a lot of the land out here, you know, so.
I think those restrictions are up by the SRA.
There's been grants of restriction in the golf course area, taken away, you know. So they're kind of meaningless to have a town or the SRA or even a grant of restriction. They don't hold the muster, you know, so. Do you have any places that people, I imagine that's going to be later down the line. I'm still a little confused, but on exactly what is definitely going to be open space and non-developable in a plan, on a plan. I'm not seeing exactly, you're saying.
Why don't we plan to do 2 things next time?
I'd be glad to meet with you.
Yeah, let's sit down and have a work session, that we have a plan,
Yeah.
all the areas are shown on the acreage, and so you know what that is.
Sure.
And labeled that way, so we can really walk through, and also a comparison plan that talks about, you know, the acreage, and so what started with and where it ends. I think those 2 things would be, our goal tonight was to, you know, try to get you as much sort of general information where we're at, but let's have a working session.
So that sounds good. It sounds excellent. There's also some language in here about roads and driveways going through open space zoned areas. to beach areas that aren't open space. So in other words, you might have a nice patch of contiguous open space, and then you might have a road running through it to another development somewhere. Doesn't make sense to have open space that's gonna be fractured with roads all over the place.
Yeah. So I think part of that was when we came up with the idea of you're gonna ring the whole site. What we didn't know is occasionally you have to put a utility through something, you go through open space area. There's no, and we put in one of the questions, we have no intention of putting any general access roads, that don't exist today through open space. So that's certainly, this again, something that we can deal with the committee. But really good that you ran the entire site in open space. But if you do that, you have to recognize you do have to get out to the grid.
So it'd be just dirt, not pervious surfaces going.
Well, we imagine that, if you get a fire department request, you're going to have to be able to.
So we discussed trails, we really don't have any connectivity to any trails within the other towns at this point, because of course a lot of the perimeter open space is all wetlands. That's why it's protected by the Park Service too. So we can do that in the working session. Okay. And then there's something else, had a list of utilities, stormwater, drainage, stormwater management, infrastructure. We had solar panel installations in open space. So that, I don't know how solar panels in open space can be one of the same.
Open space district. All right, let's look at that, Mike, because I thought that had something to do with the open space district, maybe it doesn't.
The other thing he had mentioned is lawns. People's front lawns, if they have houses or condo units, is going to be considered as open space. Okay. And we've always considered it.
Not in the plan that we have, in the calculations we did use that kind of open space. That's not open space for us.
But we considered that part of developable area.
That's part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
That we do a park in someone's neighborhood or something, we are an open space like that.
Right. We didn't consider parks as part of the open space.
We didn't count, in our numbers, we don't count, just we confirmed it, we don't count lawns or anything.
That's all I have for the moment. John, thank you. Thank you for your time.
No, these are good questions, and we want to get them out, and I think a working session or two will help.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you.
Just a couple of questions, nowhere near as detailed as Mike's, I'm afraid. You mentioned, one of you mentioned that there will be no new access roads onto the base. So to me, that means we have two entrances on Route 18, right? We have Delahan. Can you speak up a little more? Will those be the only accesses that will be built unless there's an emergency need for one?
Yeah, I put a big caveat on it.
Yep. So there'd be the two presently on Route 18 and the Delahan entrance.
Yeah, we're not planning anything else.
Good.
We're not, I know people that, you're gonna have something that screws, you gotta do.
Right.
I don't know where some of this stuff starts. I mean, it's not part of our plan.
Okay. If I'm driving onto the base on Delahan from VFW, where is the I think you called it the Tycon Basin?
Oh,
Tacon?
Tack on ditch.
Yeah, the Tacon Basin. So if I'm coming in on Delahan, or is it not around Delahan?
So, yeah, I was gonna say, I was gonna show it to you.
Okay.
The Tacon is there too.
It's in that wood.
Yeah, it's right in there, that's the Tacon.
Where are we right? And where's
Way up here, way
Delahan's up?
south of that.
Okay, so it's south of Delahan. Got it. Gotcha. Okay.
Tacon is. Yeah, I was gonna say. That's the Tacon.
Okay, right there. Okay. Okay. Tom, you mentioned that Thompson Pond is not owned by the SRA now, because that 80 acres, et cetera. Who does own that now?
There the two pieces, which are Rockland Meadows and Thompson Pond. One is owned by L-Star and the other is owned by a company called Endeavor.
And which is which, do you remember?
Thompson Pond is L-Star.
Okay. And just a couple more. The presentation that you've done tonight, is that, can we access that off of your website?
You can, and if you want, we'll send it to you.
Thank you. That'd be great. And one more thing. I understand where you are. I think I understand this a lot better than I did a week ago. What's going to town meeting?
Goes to town meeting right now, zoning.
And the zoning is the change from the 2009? No?
No, this is, okay, so it's an excellent question, Heather. Excellent question.
All right.
Zoning exists today. It is both made two parts. One is a map, one is text. The bulk of the text stays exactly the same as it is today. Doesn't change. Because all those areas, and if you look back here, when they've already developed in the yellow and the orange and the purple, you can't change it at all. We did create a new overlay district, called mixed-use development district, for the developable area, which is in Weymouth, East Abington, and Sarah. We put and created zoning that reflects that, so that when you look at the zoning, you have to look, if you're going to develop something that hasn't already been developed, you just go there. The only thing that's coming in front of the town is in the zoning bylaw, the zoning map. I don't think I have it here in this deck. The existing zoning map with its 32 overlay districts, that's going to be replaced by a different zoning map. And there's going to be a text that deals just with development area. Okay? I'm not wherever you
I thought we did.
All right, we don't know, we don't have that. But, so what's coming in front of the town, same thing that came in front of Weymouth, is a zoning text and a zoning map. Will you approve that? That is far from the end of this process. Part of this is that we file with the state dealing with natural heritage, wetland issues, environmental issues, sustainability of design, all of those different transportation, water, sewer. We have to file all of those with the state. They get reviewed by all the various state agencies. We then get, hopefully, a certificate from the state that says if you solve the water problem, if you solve the sewer problem, if you address these 30 different intersections, which is about what we've identified. Studied 72, we've identified 30 we got to fix. If you do all that, then you can go forward. We have a long road, so I know, Michael, I'd like to answer this, and for your focus, I get it. I have to tell you, right now, a lot of things we're focused on is we have to put the zoning in place, because the state says you got to work the local, put the zoning in place to allow us to be able to do it. But we're very focused on water and sewer issues. Because if we can't solve the water and sewer issues, then everything that we're doing doesn't happen. And the problem with this base is there is not enough water to be able to do this development. Abington doesn't have it, Rockland doesn't have it, Weymouth doesn't have it. Not in the region doesn't have it. Two places that have water, NWRA, fortunately the pipeline sits in the Blue Hills, not exactly next door. The second place is Aquaria and a desalinization plant that comes through Brockton and terminates in Whitman next to Peaceful Meadows. Shame. Peaceful Meadows. Go there. But that's 36-inch pipe that sits there, the desal. We've got to study, we're required to study by the state, those two opportunities as to how you can bring water to the site. So that's a really big piece, and we've told everybody, and repeat it up, we're not going to go forward unless we can demonstrate we can solve the permanent water and the permanent sewer issue. Rockland's got a terrible sewer issue. I mean, I'm not telling you folks anything you don't know. But unless we can solve both of those things, we can solve the transportation. That's money and rebuild. We can do that. Water and sewer, we're still working on. And there just won't be a project. We will just not go forward unless we can solve this.
I think I'll ask my questions and then go down. On page 24 in your zoning book, it describes open space district. By the way, I will say that the Rockland by and large, have a similar thing, that is a green ribbon around town or passive open space. And we also want to connect to our neighboring towns, and we do that in several places. So you have a green ribbon around the area that you plan to develop. But the problems I have, one is which it says active and passive open space. And how do I know which part of it is active and which part of it is passive? If somebody wants to put a soccer field into the open space ribbon that you present, it seems by the language in here that they can put it any place they can get it. It says that.
Well, a couple of things. Realize,
I understand.
if you want to go through the zoning process, a little bit far afield, but we'll start. The way it is structured now, and what we're proposing, if someone wanted to build a soccer field, they have to come through us as a master developer and say, want to build this, this is what the impacts are from a wetland standpoint, from a design standpoint, transportation, water, sewer use. We have to certify that all of those things are within what we have already filed with the SRA. We can mitigate any impacts associated with it. And if we agree that you can, and it works, then we give a certificate to the SRA that says, yeah, we've reviewed. Then the SRA requires, and remember, Rockland has, actually the chair of the SRAs, Tom Henderson and others, you have 2 representatives on there. The SRA then requires a whole series of permitting approvals and filings associated with that. How does this fit the development plan, how does it fit the zoning? They then have to go through a whole nother process of doing that. I imagine, and I think one of the things that Michael's doing is we go through this process, that we should talk about, if you've got a concern about that language, let's sort of talk about, is there anything that we can do with that? Or I would suggest to you, this isn't, even after the zoning passes, we're going to continue to work with you on the open space and the trail plan. And I don't know what's going to be active and what's going to be passive, but that's what we can talk about.
Yeah, I would be much happier, and I think a lot of people would be much happier if it was spelled out at the beginning, and it's not subject to interpretation by the developer or the SRA board. It would make me feel I could sleep on this one. And if you go to page 35, it starts talking about the things that are in open space, and a lot of it is active, as you can see, as soon as I get to clubhouses, golf courses. We say nasty things about the old golf course, but in things that can be used is golf courses in this document, indoor commercial, recreation, general, and on and this stuff. And it seems that that's
But I'm going to let Tim answer that.
spaces in Congress to these things.
That is, and this is, we'd have to go back and explain the whole zoning too. There's existing zoning that's there to reflect upon the fact that some of the zoning areas were not changing. You're reading sections out of the old zoning bylaw that don't actually apply to the development area.
It says open space recreational uses.
Tim, why don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what John's saying is a lot of those uses were just carried over from the old open space district.
But you see what I'm getting at? We want to know where the active open space is, and we want to divide that from the passive open space, and it's all general in here.
Understood.
I think
We
that can
can
be done.
talk about that during the working session as well. You know, we can walk that through a little bit more.
But I want to be really clear about something. This is something we are not going to do. We are not going to say, this particular use goes here, this particular use goes here, this can be the only area of active use. One of the reasons this project has failed 4 times, and it will fail a 5th time if you do that, because you will always guess wrong. You will always put it in the wrong place. I think we can talk about how we define those things, and we can kind of work that through. What I don't want to get into is, this has to be located, because when you look back, and we don't have it up here, the old zoning map, it was one of the greatest failures of this project.
And then if you go to what's allowed, it goes beyond wireless communication, freestanding structures, that's a tower. You wanna put that in open space?
I think what we can do
Yes.
is talk you through that which is related to the existing zoning and what that means, and that which is related to what we're proposing. I think, rather than kind of go through and try to parcel this out because it's different.
And there's several other things I won't.
Yeah, no, but these are, John, may I say, these are, Mr. Chairman, these are good questions. And we
You know,
want
I
to
find it just in Congress open space.
No, I get it, but I think we're gonna head down a road of saying, that's old zoning and new zoning, it's still in the code that's being proposed, because you have to leave that in the code, because we're not changing those things that existed prior. We can go through a whole explanation of that, but it's not a 5-minute explanation.
And Michael brought up the arrays in open space. I'd rather see milkweed in arrays and put those on the roofs of the buildings. Okay, that's where I'm coming from. Those are the questions that bother me, and do keep me awake.
We don't want to get you away, but we do want to keep you away, so we don't want to keep you away.
When you go before the towns in, town meeting, is the MUDD the major feature of what you're seeking for zoning changes? How many acres are in the MUDD?
You know that off the top of my head. I can get that number for you.
Well, could you just like ballpark it?
Can you speak up so we can hear?
Sorry, I'm looking to find out how many acres are being proposed for the MUDD district, which is to be the primary feature of the town's vote.
What I can tell you off the top of my head is the developable acres in Rockland are about 70.
I'm sorry, 17?
70.
And that would never change?
Not unless all of the constraints were to change, including the conservation restriction.
And what constraints are those?
Probably the biggest constraint is related to habitat, because much of Rockland has eastern box-turtle habitat. And then we'll also has part of the grassland habitat. And the conservation area for the eastern box turtle is also in Rockland.
But you're negotiating with natural heritage to try to change that, is that right?
Make that bigger, yes, we are.
To make,
It bigger, not small.
so would that in any way increase the amount of developable area in Rockland?
As I said, the number that, if you look at the plan that's sort of up there now on the screen, you think about the Rockland developable area, it's right there. That's the Rockland developable area. It's bigger, a little bit bigger now, it also has areas up in through here and the like that's developable. But we're making that all contiguous because it's also, one, because we think it makes sense, and it makes sense for the habitat and how they cross and that whole.
I'm sorry, has anyone come up with the number of acres yet? In the MUDD? No. Okay. Is there some reason why, in reference to Donald's question and your responses, you don't have a list of what in fact you would permit or not permit in the open spaces that you intend for this area?
You mean what type of recreational, active and passive uses are gonna be?
Any list?
We haven't done that yet. Because part of it is how it's developed, how it's phased in for development. And we've got to see if the communities are going to support the zoning. And we also have to see if we can do the infrastructure. In the hierarchy of things that we have to do, we always envision the connection of the north and the south and the open space of Bloomfield is sort of critically important to our vision, and that's right, how we're going to do it. But, as I said earlier, unless we're able to solve water and sewer issues, planning where you're going to have a particular recreational use, it's a little premature to do.
But it, as the open space committee, we look at land that we're trying to preserve as actual open space where we're not having detention ponds and we're not having cell phone towers and any of a number of the other things that are specified as permitted in the documents we have so far. So, I mean, if you have a vision that includes all of those things, we may have very different definitions of what constitutes open
I think it
space.
would be helpful to sit with the zone and sit with the plan and talk about where we do those types of things. What I can't answer for you is active and passive recreational trail plan at this stage. That I can't. But I know your point's a little bit different. I think we can answer what we intend and where things would be, if that's what you're concerned about itself, or it's open to that.
In its final form, how much building is envisioned for this property? How
Lot.
many acres are built out?
As I said, there's about 68 to 70 acres available on that you could do.
No, I'm talking about the property in its entirety.
Total pieces, 400 somewhat. It's nothing like people say, oh, it's a 1,440 acre base. The developable area after you take back natural heritage, our proposed open space, what's already been developed, it's north of 400. It's total. That's way with everything they brought.
And is that in addition to the 100 and some already, or does that include that amount?
That's our case. Remember, it's an addition. It's an addition. But that 400 is probably a little high. Is it high? Yeah, I'm not taking out roads and other infrastructure and the like, which probably brings that down 25%, 30%. So probably my 400 some odd is probably 300 some odd. There's 130 acres of.
And what type of building do you see?
We think there's a combination of commercial and residential development. I think probably all the different type of homes that you might imagine, multifamily home, duplexes, single-family homes, are all possible. Commercial development, we committed to do a town center, that we would build a place, because there really is no place here, it's something that the residents will promise. We envision that we'll do that, which would have some retail, places where people very much desire a supermarket and the like, different things like that, to create a town center, probably off the parkway, and probably straight down from the hangar area to create a town center here. And that's what we envision. But again, we've got a lot of interest. I don't think the issue is going to be that people don't want to come here, either from a commercial or residential standpoint. But unless we can solve the water and sewer issues, they won't get it.
I know it's not strictly an open space issue, although I personally see it as one, but I'm concerned about oversight of the building process. And I know in the last presentation I attended, when you made the presentation, you made reference several times to the Pine Hills development in Plymouth. And I know that a number of those residences have been plagued by building envelope failures. And it's costing the people there thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in assessments to fix those buildings. And some people are moving. So if people decide, I can't live here anymore, I have to get out, what does that do? It creates a need for more housing, because they have to go somewhere to live. And so I see that always as a threat to open space. Shoddy incomplete building. It just creates the need for more housing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a, as I understand it, there is a case that deals with a builder down there and a failure of exterior treatment that they had, years ago. It's not something that we were involved in, but I understand that there's a claim associated with that.
Oh, well, I thought that New England Development and the Green Company were the people who built some of those buildings.
Green Company is a separate entity. The Green Company did build and had a product failure, not anything that they did, but the product itself failed. But that is, they built that on land that we had sold them.
What do you need to do in order to get everything ready on your end to go before town meeting?
Well, formal acceptance and referral of the filing by the Board of Selectmen. They will refer it to the planning board. Planning board has to hold a public hearing or a joint public hearing with the SRA. That's sort of the ministerial part. They have to have a public hearing and they offer a recommendation as to whether or not they would approve the zoning. That comes out of the planning board. That's sort of the technical compliance thing that we have to do. Then from that, it's really the town meeting, whatever the town meeting decides and the action that they take has to pass by a 2/3 vote at town meeting because it's a zoning change. So it's accepted, placed on the warrant, referred, recommendation, goes to town meeting.
Well, those are the procedural things. that-
But yes, what you have to do, what's the
But I mean,
process now?
what things in developing your plans and putting forth your zoning proposals do you need to do?
Zoning proposal's been around for months and months, and available and been gone through and reviewed, commented on. That formally has been reviewed and presented to the Board of Selectmen. Board of Selectmen will then take that, as I said, and put it on the warrant, and then the planning board will review it.
I only have one question. Early on in your presentation, you mentioned that not all of the land that's identified as developable land can you develop on. I'm wondering if you can explain that a little bit more. And at what point in time would that information be tangible? And when would we know? Because we see maps that have very large areas that say developable land, but you're saying you can't develop on all of it, so at what point in the process would we know that?
Most of everything that you see, that's certainly in Abington, a bunch of it that's in Rockland, and then you have some open space that's here. Under the existing 2009 permit plan, the development today. If we seek, we are seeking with Natural Heritage to amend that permit, and Paul, if you put up the plan for, that we would propose, in the area that's here in Rockland, right in through there, or right here, right in there through Rockland, that could be it. And that's about 768, 70.
And at what point in the process does that decision get made?
Well, the ability to be able to develop on it will ultimately be what the state decides as part of the conservation action, which they will not, cannot issue until the MEPA process is done.
Don, can I follow up on that for a second?
Yeah, let's have follow-ups, go ahead.
Thanks, John. So how many acres of off-site mitigation, grass and bird, are you planning on proposing to Heritage? Because that's gonna go back to Joanne's question. If you're gonna propose 100 or 200 acres off-site mitigation, to buy land, so the state can buy land in a better spot, that will open up some more MUDD area that you have zoned MUDD right now. Is that,
Will not change what you see up on that plan right now. That doesn't change.
so everything in green will remain as open space?
It doesn't change that. We propose additional dollars. That is just to support the state in additional grassland and habitat based on the total impacts of what you see there in yellow. What you see in yellow does not change.
So when you opened up Abington a little bit, you have to mitigate that with heritage. So,
It's more the quality of some of the grassland open space, which is why we have to deal with repile some of the other things. Some of the quality is low, that grassland, because of, it's not open in that sense. So part of it is development, part of it is the quality of the grassland. Some of them are not great.
thank you.
If, when you go through the planning, if they asked you to change something, would you consider changing? Or are you gonna bring this document to the town meeting regardless if proposed changes are?
Because all communities have to approve the same document. And we don't want to go back and have to reapprove something. Would strongly not support changes to the zoning. We try to keep it as is.
All right, I'm gonna open it up to the audience. Just, you can, please don't ask the same questions we did, but unless you want clarification. And Mary, go ahead.
Mary
Just say your
Parsons.
name and address.
754 Union Street, Rockland. What we're going to be voting on November 7th is the actual zoning map. We're not voting on these maps. We're not voting on natural heritage or what comes after. It's just your zoning map and the table of permitted uses that you have in the actual reuse plan. And in your reuse plan, under open space, it actually states open space areas may include, and here's the key word, may include but not be limited to parks, parklands, playgrounds, wetlands, including waterways and water bodies and associated buffer zones, uplands, rare species habitat. The difference between the word may and shall is the legal word that means you have to do all of those things. In your open space that will be, and amenities that we will be voting on, you say may. So that basically lets you off the hook. You don't have to do any of those. And it's listed in other places, like some open space will be located in the southern and eastern portions of the NES, formerly the taxiways and landing strips, which contain rare species habitat surrounded by wetlands and uplands. Rare species habitat may be protected from intrusion, management for maintenance and habitat, and so on and so forth. And I'm sorry, but those words mean you don't have to do it, and you want our vote before any of this takes place. And you're not putting up your actual zoning map with your core development, and then on the side it says how many square feet of commercial development you're going to have, and up to a maximum of 6,000 housing units. And you always have to plan for the maximum, not the minimum. So to go to her questions and about the multi-use development district, that is what we're really voting on, and that is smack dab in what you claim you're going to protect. The other issue I have is there is a signed Natural Heritage Park Service that had to be got from the Navy through a public benefit conveyance, and it's signed, and it is specific about the acreage in each parcel of land, all the way down from Rockland and through Abington, and there's very little in the Weymouth section. Plus, in your history of everything, you don't even mention that in 2016, the town of Rockland voted our current plan and map that's in place. And we do need to know what the acreage is for the open space as well as the multi-use development district. You can't just throw a map up and say, well, we need you to vote on this, but we can't tell you what the acreage is. And everyone here that lives in Rockland will be able to speak on this at town meeting.
Terry, could I have that?
My question is the acreage, where is your monumentation? I know what the acreage that we received from the Navy, the Economic Development Conveyance, and that includes a golf course. Because the Navy, they saw a golf course as money generator. The Navy does not recognize housing as an economic generator. And the only other way to obtain open space for parks and recreation and all of that was through a public benefit conveyance. And that is already a signed document, and the map that goes with it that we all have.
Tim can speak to the zoning piece. I mean, we're not looking to change anything that's in that agreement. And our spaces include, and our restricted spaces, and our conservation areas include those spaces. So I don't think there's anything that changes with respect to that. There's nothing wrong with any of that language. Yes, those areas may include this, that, that's all appropriate. Some of those won't include those things. Some of there, you won't have active recreation in some of those areas. I think the language is perfectly fine and the way it should be drafted. So that's all I would say.
Yeah, I wouldn't have it. On zoning, yes, the map and the text are what's being approved. The redevelopment plan is not before town meeting. That's already been approved by the SRA. So it's just the proposed zoning map and the proposed zoning text.
Okay, anybody else? It's
My name is John Ward, I live at 22 Nevins Circle. We're proposing a mixed-use plan. Some of that will be housing. And I know it's early in the stage of this, but any idea of how many housing units will be on the Rockland side of the border?
At this stage, we don't, because one of the nodes that makes the most sense for commercial is if you come off the Parkway and hit the first part of Rockland for developable area. So very difficult to say what the housing area would be. As I said, I think the first part we've identified there, not insignificant portion that could be done for commercial. There's sort of 3 commercial nodes you could do in this site. So we haven't done much of a housing plan in that area. But again, remembering there's only 68 to 70 acres that you really have for development. So it's fairly limited as to what you can do as to any development.
Just a couple of follow-ups here. If you do housing, are you planning any single-family housing, or is it going to be, as you mentioned, duplex, multifamily?
And single. And if I didn't say it, I should have. We think that all product types of houses and places where people live is a market for. No great surprise, the areas that have been developed, if you look up at that plan, and you think about some of our green, sort of the green nodes, you could imagine that you're going to have more dense housing, more multifamily, 3-4 story multifamily along those areas. And then as you get out of this area and sort of go on the other side of the Parkway, you have less dense housing, and then you're looking at single families and townhomes. That's sort of what our theory is.
Do you anticipate any high-rise development in housing?
I mean, high-rise, 10, 12 story, I mean, real high-rise, no. There was a lot of discussion in some of the older plans that talked about 10, 20 story buildings. That wasn't real. There's no market for that here. That's not what how people live in this area.
You mentioned there's a water source, Aquarium, which is the desalinization plant out of Taunton.
Right.
Right. Now, if that were to happen, you have potentially water coming in from there. But where's the sewage going? Because right now, Rockland is in a very bad position as far as sewer. We are probably going to need an $80 million upgrade to our sewer plant just to bring us up to current standard to meet the EPA requirements. If for the town to take on additional development, either from this site or others that are proposed, we probably have to build an additional sewer facility. And that's gonna take a very long time, but in both cases, so that's a concern. Where's the sewage?
Rockland Sewer is probably on our top 5 list of really troublesome issues. As far as what can be done, what monies can be spent, what improvements could be made, is there a solution for it? We've looked at everything from trying to do something on site, which is a deal, especially given the PFAS issues associated with the site, to other improvements, to coming up with alternatives, to see if there's ways to deal with neighboring communities. We don't have a solution for that. And that's why this project, we can't come up with a permanent solution for water and sewer. And that's what I meant when I answered the chairman's question. And we can't develop this site. And we don't have an answer yet for Rockland Sewer. It's probably the worst piece of infrastructure we're trying to address right now.
Thank you. I just want to say a couple of things. I don't want to cut anybody off. We're really getting up against our schedule and for the room. So if we could keep the questions to open space issues, I know there's tons of bigger issues in open space perhaps, but okay. Enough said. Next. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I have a mixed question. Part of it is sewer, part of it's open space.
We need to name an address.
Chuck Hessian, 110 Huggins Road, Rockland. Before I speak, I'd like to call a requested meeting of the sewer commissioners. Do I have a second? All in favor? Meeting of sewer commissioners is open. I'm doing that to protect myself from open space. One, has there been any evaluation done when you're looking at the open space of any potential revenue loss from Rockland? Tax revenue, commercial revenue, by changing the open space. And I'm probably a bigger proponent of open space than the ladies and gentlemen on that panel. But I have to wonder, have they looked at dollars and cents wise, are we gonna lose any potential revenue by that new?
There's very little tax revenue that comes from that area. At the end of the day, we end up, what you have today, about the same amount of developable area as there is today. The upside for revenue, obviously, which we have done, have looked at and presented a fiscal study to the Board of Selectmen, is very significant as far as upside. I would suggest, given that there's really no change in developable area, really, and given what the taxes are for this area, it's really, it's negligible if it exists.
My last question, and I hate to bring it up, is sewer, we're generally sewer commission. The only meeting I've had is with Bob and Tony Omabona. You said that's one of your biggest issues, yet they're the only gentleman that's reached out to us. You plan on any? Okay. I'm sorry.
Could you repeat your question, please?
I was just wondering if they plan on reaching out to discuss with sewer. They said it's one of the biggest issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a 1-hour meeting with
As it relates to Rockland, it is. As you might imagine, we've been very focused on water in recent term, dealing with MWRA and Aquaria, MWRA coming down to Weymouth, the creation of Weymouth as in the SRA as MWRA communities. We've probably spent an inordinate amount of time trying to address that issue first. We do understand a lot of the Weymouth issues and some of the cost issues, and we'll be getting back to your group. But we have been spending, I would say, the bulk of our time recently.
The only reason I'm going to encourage you to be more proactive on that is that we're at a very, we're in the middle of the development stage now. We're already going into stage 1. So any decisions is going to radically impact what we're going to be doing. So I'd rather know now than down the road, because we're starting to spend some serious money.
Fair enough, thank you. We'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Gary, last question.
I have one more. In your multi-use development district, because you've zoned the golf course area as multi-use development district, it's no longer, Rockland only has 74 acres that can be developed. It's now, Rockland has, if I calculate right, it's 203 acres on our side for the golf course, plus 100 acres going across the east-west runway, and then another 26 acres going down. So that would be 335 acres of developable land according to your reuse map. So that's why we need to know, and in terms of open space, in your open space, you have restaurants for, indoor sports centers and so on and so forth, which we would love to have some kind of development.
Yeah, I don't know where some of your numbers come from. It fails me sometime. I think as part of the working session, if we want to talk, there's no amount of developable acres like that that aren't subject to other restrictions. So I don't know where your numbers come from.
Well, you have one map that has multi-use development district, and that's the only one that we're voting on, and then, but you're telling us that after we vote for this and approve it, all of this other stuff comes into play, which it may or may not, because according to your own reuse plan, it may happen.
Mary, through you, Mr. Chair, you're conflating a lot of different issues. You can't ignore things like the 2009 CMP permit. You can't ignore the existing CRs and open space and say, oh, it's this. I mean, that's an interesting game to play, but it's not real. Happy to talk about it in a work session with the open space.
Okay, seeing nobody else, I have no other business. Is there anything the board want to bring out? Any final statements? All right, I'm going to adjourn the open space committee. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for
Thank you.
making your presentation and answering our questions.
Thank you.